It's already begun.
It can be applied to any.
Thank you very much.
Can I?
Over here?
Yeah, my question is, you mentioned something about how you had a non-conforming survey, or was the first community-based survey. What did you guys do to avoid the $75,000?
We collected all the data, and then we had it vetted by a qualified architectural historian. And I wrote a database for it, it's been used 4 times since for new HPOZ.
So you just had an architect volunteer their services to?
No, actually, we did some study, we did some bootstrapping, we had some consultations with a company called Architectural Resources Group, and they guided us, and with Lambert Giesinger, other people in the city, and they guided us into how to decide what data we needed, how to collect it, what we were looking at, how to identify styles. And we turned it in, and there were very few changes. So it can be done. It's not for everybody, though, because it is very labor intensive for a few people. You almost need somebody who will work full time on that one thing and who has the skill set to do the variety of things that's required.
Robbie, did you get any funding from the neighborhood council?
No.
For the survey?
No, we took no public money at all.
Sometimes you can petition the neighborhood council for funds to help fund the project as well.
Tell them what neighborhood you are, Robbie. Some people are confused exactly what area you are.
Wilshire Park, Country Club Park, Windsor Village.
Which is from what street to what?
Wilshire Park is Wilshire to Olympic, Wilton to Crenshaw.
Okay.
Country Club is, I think they go all the way to Western, to Crenshaw, and from Olympic to Pico. And Windsor Square goes from Crenshaw to Fremont, and from Wilshire to Olympic.
Thank you.
Jeremy, you had a question?
Actually, I was just going to make a comment in response to Gina's question. I remember attending one of the original meetings at...
Speak up, Jeremy. Yeah.
I'm also on the board of the MMRA and on the subcommittee here with Mark, the HPOZ subcommittee. I remember at one of the original meetings at your house, Mark, one of the presenters, and I believe it was somebody from the city or possibly from Architectural Resources Group. It was Katie, that's right. We were informed by this person at the original meeting that basically without a doubt, enough homes, enough properties in the MMRA boundaries that Mark talked about are contributors, no question, such that we would, just on a pure statistical basis, on a proportional basis, we would qualify. I think we're over the 70% figure that Shannon mentioned as being the threshold that they look for. So we've got what it takes right now in the neighborhood to meet the city's expectation about how many contributors there are. Obviously, as the gentleman said, we want to make sure we move on this as fast as possible because with the passage of time, we're going to start losing that number. It's going to start slipping as more homes get demolished.
Yes?
Would existing homes who've already been altered 15, 20 years ago fall under grandfather thing, or would they have to tear out all the stuff that was done and bring it up to historical value?
No, you don't have to tear it out. But, no, you can leave it as is, but maybe Shannon can address that.
So, being in an HPOZ doesn't mean that the city suddenly goes door to door and says, you have to take this off, you have to do this.
No.
It's all elective. So somebody goes down to building and safety, they want to remodel their front porch. Let's say they've been identified as a contributor altered, so it's still contributing, but there's some alterations. One of the things that was altered was the porch. So I would talk to that homeowner and say, okay, well, here's the survey page. Your house dates from this year. There's a note here that your porch was altered at some time along the way. What are you proposing to do? So let's say the homeowner wants to restore the porch. That's something that we can help guide them on. That would be the preservation way to go. If they wanted to make further alterations that weren't compatible to the porch, that probably wouldn't be allowed, but we wouldn't force you to take off what's there if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're not forced to do anything if it exists there.
Yeah.
You had a question, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, we happen to be on Detroit where it's all duplexes, which I know there was a mention about multifamily, but basically you're not mentioning the duplexes, and we are all duplexes. One, would we specifically fall into that and the possibility that we could be considered, for the those special denominations? And if we do require help from the board and the architects and so on, is that given to us at no cost?
Yes, so duplexes that are eligible, that retain their historic character, would definitely be included in the HPOZ if it's in the proposed boundary. What's really great about the HPOZ program is there's no fee for conforming work. So it's totally free. You'll pay for your building permit, but all those meetings that you have, if you have multiple, could just be one phone call with staff. It's totally free. There's no charge. There's a charge. It varies from $1,000 to $2,000 if you were doing something really, really significant, like adding a large addition or adding a second story, which not all communities are in favor of. So that's one of the more tricky issues. Sometimes people have a predominantly one-story neighborhood, and so preservation plans can say second-story additions are strongly discouraged, or second-story additions may be found to be appropriate if they're done in a certain way. So that's something to think about too. How restrictive would you want your HPOZ to be? And that's all fleshed out by the preservation plan, and that's vetted through the community before it's adopted.
And that could be tweaked. It's like Windsor Square's HPOZ is very strict. That about the landscaping.
No.
That's not?
Windsor Square, we probably shouldn't talk about. It's a very, it's not a typical HPOZ. There was a lawsuit filed when they were trying to become an HPOZ, and because of that, a lot of compromises had to be made. So it's actually a less restrictive preservation plan, one of the least restrictive.
Okay, pardon me. I've understood differently.
But Hancock Park,
Hancock
they're
Park.
they're somewhat loose also, but they are very strict. No fences, never, no way, no hedges, no walls, things like that. And so that kind of identity of how the HPOZ is going to work for the community comes from the board and how they review things, but also how they're outlined in the preservation plan. We don't want to surprise community members. We don't want to surprise potential homeowners. So that's why we have the preservation plan that discusses all these things from landscaping, windows, roofs, to make it really clear kind of what you're signing up for and what the guidelines are.
So as far as landscaping, an HPOZ board that we form, let's say here in Miracle Mile, maybe, there'll be more room and leeway compared to, let's say, Hancock Park. So we're not going to require, this and that.
Right. And each property is taken on its own, right? One property might be on an alley and it has a little bit of a different circumstance where it really needs to have some sort of protection for safety. So all those things are taken into consideration.
Yes.
David, that's me. It's a question for Shannon. I wonder, another disincentive approach to the McMansion issue, correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be some sort of minimum design requirement or qualification once that plan is submitted to you in terms of what goes up. Am I right about that?
In what situation? For what HPOZ?
For McMansion to go up.
In an HPOZ or anywhere in the city?
Right, in a non-HPOZ.
In a non-HPOZ, There's a little bit of design review, but not really. The way the baseline mansionization ordinance is written, in an R1 zone, for example, a single family zone, you can build 50% of your lot size can be your house. If you set back your facade a certain amount, they'll give you a bonus.
Oh, right, okay.
So it actually becomes bigger if you do articulation. And there's a couple other bonuses on there. If the house has, if it's a greenhouse and it has all these sustainability features, it can be larger as well. And all these bonuses are creating kind of this problem where these houses are becoming way more than 50% of the lot size.
So my follow-up question would be, is there a potential to tighten up or elevate the design requirements as a disincentive for any developer who's considering knocking down to build a McMansion? I ask that because originally house from, it's, design's subjective, but originally house is not bad, it just doesn't belong here. Whereas if we know the 800 block of Cloverdale, it just looks like four walls slapped up. It's the White House. It is truly a box with the cheapest windows you can buy. So there seems to be some variant of design requirements. So I'm wondering, as a strategy, could motions be set, however it takes, to just up the requirement to include, it has to somehow refer to what the neighborhood characteristic, something like that.
Right, so that's what the HPOZ would do. The baseline mansionization ordinance now doesn't really go into design. The RFA districts would talk more about size. So there isn't really a tool right now between HPOZ, which is very, very, very highly designed, and RFA, which is more about massing. There is a citywide initiative right now called Recode LA, which is a 5-year effort to rewrite our antiquated zoning code. I don't know if you've ever seen the zoning code in person. It's very, very thick. It was originally written in the 1940s, and things have just been added kind of piecemeal through the years. So you might go to one section to find something else, then go to another section. You have to go 5 places to find out what you can build. So we're working to clean it up, and as part of that, we're working with a consultant who's looking at maybe more of a form-based code, which could address things like site planning, design, articulation, things like that. So I recommend, they're doing a lot of public outreach right now, Recode LA. They'd probably be very interested in hearing what you have to say. You can email them and submit your concerns about things that aren't being addressed currently in the code.
Yes, ma'am?
You indicated that there are 2 ways of getting the application for the HPOZ process started. One is to go through our city council person, and the other is to get, I think you said 75% of the neighborhood, people in the neighborhood to sign on. Are either of those avenues presently being pursued? And if not, do we plan to, and how is it actually going to happen? Who is going to instigate it?
I think what we're going to do is, like a lot of them, is because it's such a big area, I think we're going to pursue go to the city council to try to get a motion, right, Shannon, and then do a series of public hearings. And the city will come in, and they'll have a public hearing officer, and your departments will be there, and they're going to see and monitor the people's reaction. So, like if all you guys start, no, we don't want it, the city's going to listen to that and say no. If you say you want it, you're leaning towards it, they're going to hear that. So we think we're going to go that way because it's such a big area to get a petition going, to get 70%, that would be very difficult, especially with a lot of multifamily dwellings. You had one more question, sir?
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned the RFA earlier, and so what do we do for those people who are interested in supporting it? What do we do to put pressure on the elected officials now to get it passed?
Okay, I'll turn the camera around. Let me turn the camera around.
Sure.
What you can do is, how many of you get the newsletter? Does everybody get the newsletter? Okay, if you don't, make sure Mr. Stein has your email address, because we're covering it a lot. And you can also, again, you can go to the miraclemilela.com. That is the website of the Miracle Mile Residential Association. We have an RFA HPOZ page there, a tab at the top. We try to put as much information as possible. As we evolve, a lot of this is like trapeze, at a trapeze act. It's about timing when you let go of one bar and reach for another. So I can't answer your question right now when we will make these moves. We felt it was important right now because we've been doing a lot of in-house conversation and consideration and evaluation to do this and open it up. Because in many ways, this is akin to an Amway distributorship. We can't do it just by ourselves. We need salespeople. We need people who know their neighbors, who can go to our website, get the information, read our newsletters, pass it on. Say, hey, do you get the newsletter? Make sure they subscribe. We've got to spread the word, and we need you to be the salespeople for this. In terms of the timing of when we do these next steps, working with experts and with our political contacts and with others in LA. We have a close relationship with both Carthay Circle Neighborhood Association. They've been down this road before. We work hand in hand with Beverly Wilshire Homes. So we have friends who can help guide us and advise us. So right now, the only thing I can tell you right now is we have a pending RFA application, and in terms of when to put pressure, it's a little murky right now. I think because it's just after the holidays. I'm hoping, I know a lot of us from different areas are working about what kind of pressure we put on City Hall and when we do it to get them to put up this 2-year temporary ban. But the time is not today. But if you check, follow the website, but also just read the newsletter.
Yeah.
Okay?
And I got to say, with the Miracle Mile Residential Association, that's what we do. We speak for you because of our connections with the city, and we put pressure to protect our area, our hood. And so, thanks to people like Ken and Miss O'Sullivan and her husband, who can't be here today, but the president of the Miracle Mile Residential Association, knows everyone in the city and does what he can to protect this area. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, this is a question for Shannon and maybe also for you as well, Robbie. So the kind of examples people have been giving about mansionization happening in Beverly Grove, we've seen that in Ridgely, but we've also seen some other kinds that are not just size but density happening in the American Mile. And as a specific example, I'm going to talk about the 4 houses that were 2 of them on Orange Grove and 2 of them on Ogden that were demolished. I believe all 4 of them were duplexes, and then we had just an open lot for several years. And what had been 8 units is now being replaced with a 45-unit 4-story building. So we've 3-story?
No, it was R3, that's why they could do it.
And so my first question is, this kind of stopgap measure, the RFA, would that make that much more difficult to do?
No.
And then Robbie, did you, in your areas that you were, did you have anything like that going on before you had this, your new status? So maybe my first part of the question to you, Shannon, the second part to you, the density issue.
Sure. Unfortunately, HPOZ doesn't change the underlying zone. So the duplexes would never have been demolished in the first place if the HPOZ had been in existence. But we can't restrict the density that's allowed by the zoning. We can work to kind of massage it to be more appropriate and more compatible with the neighborhood, but we can't override completely the existing zoning. So you would need to get that zoning reduced to a lower density to prevent those types of units from going in.
But only in the absence of an HPOZ. In other words, if there were an HPOZ, like you just said, that building never would have come down in the first place.
No, it wouldn't have.
Right.
But if there was a non-contributing apartment building that existed, let's say something built in the 70s, and that was going to be torn down, they still have a right to that density, but what's built would have to be more compatible with the neighborhood.
And Robbie, you had similar experiences, or?
Windsor Village has had more trouble than us because they have some of their major streets are R3. And there is a very controversial project that was approved under really bad circumstances. We have one currently on Wilton, which is a non-contributor that's being torn down and being replaced with, I believe it's 10 units. We talked them down to 8, but yeah, we deal with that. Even though, because it's a non-contributor in an R3, our R3 is really the only thing that's problematic. We've got the R1 nailed, but our periphery on Wilshire Park is R3. And in Windsor Village, they've got R3 right down the heart of it. So those are big problems. We spend a lot of time coping with those.
Just to mention, with an R3, R1, everyone knows what an R1 is, a single family home. R3 means, you can have multiple units with different restrictions according to the size of the lot and density. A lot of people have been getting letters in the mail. Now, I'm a realtor, but developers are sending letters out to homes that have R3. My home is the only R3 on a single family street. They want my property because they want to tear down my house and build 5 units on my small little property. That's the danger of R3. So your apartment building, although they're sitting in R3, and it's already zoned that way, and they can demolish it if it's not HPOZ and build whatever the zoning allows for the space of that property. That's
The only thing I've been dealing that with in the Beverly Grove area, the only thing that would cover that, from what I was told, other than HPOZ, is a Q override. You could get a Q override to cover, basically written for density is what I'm trying to get. So they can only build to 0.75 of the lot, which is about the size of the current apartment buildings in my area.
What is that huge override?
Q, the letter Q override. It's called. It's just, I don't know what it's. Conditions,
it's
right?
A qualified condition.
Qualified conditions, yeah.
They were really popular in the 80s to address issues like this, and we're trying to move away from using
But
them.
is there any other way to cover?
Well, you could downzone through the
Is that
community
easier?
plan update process, but I think that's difficult to do, and that's where it kind of comes back to trying to have 70% contributors, because if you have a lot of non-contributors scattered through the HPOZ, those sites have the potential to be redeveloped, and they have the right to be redeveloped to whatever the underlying zone is. They'll look and feel more compatible, but that density isn't restricted by the HPOZ, and that sometimes presents a big conflict.
Did you? Go ahead.
With a non-conforming property that's, let's say, zoned R3, and you get an HPOZ in, and then somebody wants to tear it down, do they then have to build to the HPOZ can then dictate the architectural componentry of that to a certain degree, right? In other words, when you tear down any non-conforming building to rebuild it, you have to rebuild it in the flavor of the neighborhood if possible.
Correct. It has to be found to be compatible with the neighborhood and meet a list of guidelines. And if it can't be found to meet those guidelines, it's likely not to be approved. So the board would make a recommendation on whether to approve or deny it, and staff weighs very heavily on what the board recommends.
So give an example, Shannon. If an area like ours is all tutors and Spanish, and a non-contributor's being demolished, give me an example, what would be in conflict to be built there?
Sure. So, for example, I have a project in another HPOZ. There's a non-contributor that is going to be demolished, and They want to build a new house. What was there was a one-story. They want to build two. That's okay. There are two-story houses in the neighborhood. But, for example, it's a corner lot, and they wanted to move the entrance from the main north-south street to the east-west running street, which isn't the common place for the front door to be. So I've made it very clear to them, I like what you're doing with your setbacks, but you have to orient the house towards the main street, because that's how it's going to feel compatible, and you need to make the facade that's in line with all the other houses on the street be the front facade. So that's one example of how we work with non-contributors to make them be more compatible.
Yudi, you had a question?
When you say non-conforming, is because they don't qualify for HPOZ? When you say non-conforming?
Sure. So it means they are part of the HPOZ. They are reviewed, but not under the same type of scrutiny for a historic house.
Okay, so this is my question. Like, for example, I live on Allendale, and I would say there is like one or two streets in Miracle Mile that hasn't been touched, where it's all rental. We have duplexes and sixplex. If the HPOZ gets in effect, how would you protect all those buildings? Can somebody come buy and demolish one of the buildings and then build a 4 or 5 story building? That's what I'm confused.
Not if those buildings haven't been really altered. So it sounds like they probably haven't been if they're still there. Maybe they have some window change outs. Maybe there's been some bad stucco work. Maybe there's like a small funky addition. That wouldn't make it a non-contributor. If something's built in the period of significance, the period of the development of the neighborhood, and it only has like tiny tweaks that aren't really significant, you can still tell, wow, that's a building from the 1920s. It's likely to be a contributor.
Yes.
Yeah, they haven't touched.
So it would be totally protected. And any work that would be done would have to follow the guidelines.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Well, I came a little late, so I apologize.
No,
I'm
it's okay.
sure you defined contributing and non-contributing. I'm not sure what the definition is.
Go ahead. Robbie?
Well, contributing would be something that retains its historical fabric. Stuff is still there. Non-contributing has a lot of stuff that's been removed. You know, the decoration's gone. It's got a big modification. It's been remodeled. The roof line's different. Those would be non-contributing. And there's all kinds of nuances in between, like but when a qualified architectural historian looks at it, they look at many, many factors when it's on an edge.
So in other words, if the neighborhood was all Victorian homes with all the beautiful gingerbread and so forth, and someone along the line took this Victorian home and ripped off all the gingerbread, changed the door and put some modern addition, that would be non-contributing because it would be so ruined. It wouldn't fit anymore with the ones that are still intact. Or let's say it was something that was torn down years ago and something in the 70s went up, and so it's not compatible with the general Victorian neighborhood.
Even in some cases, even a Victorian, let's say the windows are still there, but at some point the entire building was covered in stucco, it could still be considered a contributor because that alteration can be removed.
By a new owner, maybe they'll come in and they'll say, "Wait, this ugly stucco," like I said on the no-don'ts before. They could tear that off and restore it.
That's happened in our neighborhood on several houses.
You had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm relatively new to California and LA. But, so clearly one of the benefits of an HPOZ is that you can learn a lot about your house, which is kind of interesting. But given that we may not have that designation now, you talked about Survey LA, where they have done some investigation of houses. one learn more about these towns now without HPOZ or even without the benefit of Survey LA?
How to learn more about
Your house, the history of your house.
Oh, the history of the house, actually, Robbie O'Donnell.
There's a lot of ways, and a lot of them you can do in your jammies and slippers. If you go to, for example, the Los Angeles Library website, latl.org, you'll find that there's a complete archive of all of the Los Angeles Times. You can Google your address, you might find a picture of it in there for when it was for sale back in 1903. Or you can also find on the same website the Sanborn maps, which will show you the footprint of the area in the 20s and again in the 50s. It was like what they did for Google. They were insurance maps, but they show the footprint of each and every building, the number of stories, and its use. So there's stuff like that. Also, if you get some of the books that are out there are several about Los Angeles that will help you just figure out what your neighborhood is like. In this one, specifically for this neighborhood, there's a book called Miracle Mile, and there's also another book called Wilshire Boulevard, and those two are indispensable for locals.
You can also pull historic building permits for your property at Building and Safety downtown at 201 North Figueroa or at the Van Nuys location. And that's really fun to read through these old documents. They're all mostly handwritten. You kind of need to decipher the old writing, but then you'll find out when they did something to the bathroom or added something on. It's like playing detective.
And recently, they've scanned a lot of them, so they're very easy to read now. They've been optimized, indexed so much better than they were when we did our permits. Because you have to, when you're doing a survey, you have to pull out your permit. And it's really a pleasure anymore. You can just do it all at their computers at the site there.
Okay, we'll do you.
Sorry, can I just add something really
go
quickly?
ahead. Yeah.
For everybody, if you're not familiar with the city's zoning information map access system, ZIMAS, ZIMAS.org, it's really great. It's like a one-stop shop. You can find out information about who your council person is, what your neighborhood council is. There's assessor information there, cases that have been applied for on your house. You can link to building and safety from there, and you can plug in any address in the city and find out what's going on that property. ZIMAS.org.
Can Ken put this on our newsletter?
He is, actually.
Ken, yes, Ken.
Sir, you had a question.
I just had a quick question about RFA, going back to that. It seems like the HPOZ is going to take a while, so you were talking about throwing the RFA in there to stop everything. My question is, when I think of McMansions, Ridgely is like a 400% increase in the size of that house, versus you were saying 120% would be an RFA. So if you only own a 1,000 square foot house, doing the 20, that's only a 20 by 20 room that you can add, versus Ridgely was 400%. They built a house that was 4 times the size of the original house. So how did we come to the 120%? And before that's imposed, is there going to be a vote or something to decide the size of the RFA?
There will be public hearings, much like an HPOZ, and I will move the camera. And I couldn't get my twin brother out of bed today. Am I on? Yeah. Much like the HPOZ process, the Department of Planning has to conduct public outreach and gather input on it. The reason I cited this 120% figure is that is what the RFA in the Beverly Grove area, which was approved, is in force, says. So we made a strategic decision to not ask for something new right now. We wanted to get our application in. They're very complicated. So we thought, this has already been vetted and approved and saluted by both the Department of Planning and by the City Council. So that's why, for expedience sake, that's why we chose that. So that's where that 120% comes.
And that obviously, as as it moves on, that can be negotiated
Indeed,
at some point.
absolutely. Indeed, anything we do, RFA, HPOZ, has a mandated amount of public input, public outreach. So obviously, we, as an organization, will be holding meetings. But the Department of Planning has a mandate to do X number, this A, B, C, and D in terms of public outreach.
This gentleman?
I have a quick follow-up to that. The interim ordinance, the one that would essentially do a 2-year delay, does that require environmental work to be done by planning before it can be done, or is it simply when the city council decides to approve it?
It does require environmental review.
And so is that the time delay to get it passed by city council?
Yes, so that has to be prepared before it can go back to city council for final approval.
Did you have another question?
Yeah. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that you painted your house blue before it was a historic preservation overlay. Your house has been determined by the committee to be culturally sensitive. And then you go ahead and you need to paint your house after it's gotten the HPOZ zone. Will the committee say, well, blue wasn't in the 1920s, but you can go and paint it gray? I mean, is it that kind of oversight where you're starting to tell people what color their windowsills can be? Or, how does that work?
It depends what's decided on by the community. A lot of the new HPOZs, in their preservation plan, they have some things that are just exempt from review altogether. And one of those things in some is paint color. So some paint colors in certain HPOZs aren't reviewed at all. In others, paint color is referred to the planning department. In most cases, if you're painting it the color that it already is, again, it's exempt from review. If you were going to change the paint color, planning staff would probably review it. But if you were proposing to paint it a Spanish Revival House orange, we would probably try and steer you in a different direction.
So if it's blue, you could leave it that way. But if you choose to repaint, the board might say, here are the colors that are best for your home. They might give you a palette of colors that best suit this architectural style home. And you might want to choose from that. Yes?
Can I make a comment about that? We feel that we really need as broad-based community input as possible on 2 critical issues. Okay? One of them is the issue that this lady just identified, which is basically what will this HPOZ document say? What will it prohibit? What will it allow? What will it restrict? What will it exempt altogether from review? Those sorts of things. Okay? We don't want to be some kind of a small little panel of a few of us from the MMRA board who just gets together in some kind of cabal, you might say, okay, and comes up with some plan and then dictates it and mandates it on top of all the residents of this community. We do not want to do that, okay? Which is one reason why I personally am really happy to see today here at this meeting a whole bunch of faces that I don't know, people that are not on our board, people that don't come to every monthly meeting and the HPOZ subcommittee meetings. I'm really glad to see all you folks here. I can tell that some of the flyer distributions that we did and the outreach that we did about this meeting has been successful and has paid off by virtue of the fact that all of you are here, and I think that's a really great first step. So this needs to be a consensus process, and we're very, very committed to that philosophy. We want to make sure that we have that going forward. Okay? There could be a wide range of different viewpoints, for example, on issues like paint color. Okay? I personally, for one, I may prefer some paint colors to others. I may see some homes in my neighborhood, even on my street, that have recently changed their paint color in a way that I personally am not in favor of and wouldn't necessarily do to my own house, and maybe even don't think should have been done to that house. But nonetheless, I'm not sure that that's a subject that needs to be dictated or reviewed necessarily by an HPOZ board, if we have an HPOZ in our community, as part of the document. So the point I'm making here is that these HPOZ documents is not a one-size-fits-all kind of a thing for every single community. And as we go through the process, we have the ability to draft the kind of document that we want that will accomplish our goals as we decide on them as a community, and make sure that we have something that best suits what everybody, as best we can on a broad-based level, what everybody is trying to accomplish here. The second thing I think that we really need a whole lot of volunteerism for and community input by all of us is on this issue of the survey that Robbie talked about today. Because as you've heard here today, there's effectively two ways to go about trying to accomplish this survey, which is a necessary step in the process. One is to pay a specialized firm, such as Architectural Resources Group, to do your survey for you. That way it gets done very well, it gets done professionally, it gets done relatively quickly, I think, and it's also costly, as we've heard. Okay? Another way to do it is the way that Robbie and her team did it in Wilshire Park, which is to effectively do it yourselves. And from what I understand from speaking to Robbie, it's not necessarily all that difficult. Okay? You don't have to have advanced degrees, which I certainly don't, in architecture or in real estate or in preservation or any of these fields in order to be able to actually carry out the steps of doing this survey. What you do need to have, especially for a neighborhood as big as ours, is time. And you need to have a lot of manpower and woman power, as Robbie said, because it is labor intensive. And so, as far as I understand, for example, the steps in doing the survey include pulling permits for every single property, taking a photo of every single property, doing some basic historical research about every single property. You know, I can volunteer to do that, for example, for my block, and I would be willing to do that. I might volunteer to do it for my block and the adjacent block. I can't volunteer to do it for every block of the neighborhood. That's just impossible. But we feel that if we get enough people, all of us, and hopefully a bunch more, to volunteer to do a block or two, this might be a way that we can accomplish the service similar to how it was done by Robbie and her team in Wilshire Park. I will also point out really quick on the survey issue, in response to what you said, ma'am, about learning more about your own home. Before I bought a home here in Miracle Mile, I came very close to buying a home in Wilshire Park. That's where I first met Robbie. And they were right on the cusp of getting their HPOZ. This was in 2008. The home that I came close to buying is a historic home, beautifully preserved and restored by the prior owners, some of the prior owners before I came into the picture. And as part of my basically research into this house and negotiations to potentially buy it, I was able to get a copy of the survey for this particular home, which had already been done by Robbie and her Wilshire Park HPOZ team. It was extraordinary. Okay? It was 1 or 2 pages, I think, about this home that I was considering buying. And it told me, it was like an encyclopedia almost about this particular house. And we will have that for all of our homes, for all of our properties, even including homes that we may rent here in the neighborhood but not own. We will have that if we go ahead and complete the survey. And it's really a magnificent document, and it's a wealth of information that really makes you feel that much more invested and that much more glad to be a resident in this community.
Yeah, thank you. So, yes, there's many ways of raising money to do it, like he said, through volunteer in the community, or we could find money in other ways, which we're discussing on how to do that. We haven't found that yet. Yes, you need.
Do you have the guidance about the survey, exactly step by step?
Yeah. I actually wrote a database to do our Wilshire Park one. It's been used 4 times since, and right now I'm working with Architectural Resources Group on a 2,000 property. They want to do this national register because they're not within the city. But I can give you that blank database, and I can give you the guidance on it, and then you can work with Katie, because she and I are, Katie from Architectural Resources Group, because she and I have a way of splitting this job so that her time is reserved for the things that needs an architectural historian, but the legwork is done by people like me. And I can show you how to do that. I can give you step by step. Architectural Resources Group can, once your boundaries are determined, they can use GIS to give you all of the property, the assessor parcel numbers, and so you can get it populated with assessor parcel numbers. You just go and look at each house and you write down, well, it's this style of house, it's 2 stories, it has this kind of roof, it has this kind of window. You don't have to have a degree for that.
Well,
so it can be done.
I think that should be in the Miracle Mile website, for the people like this guy said, well, maybe one person per block, like me. So we can start doing it, but we need to know the stage, where to go, to talk. Maybe that should be displayed in there, and that will help.
You have a question, sir?
How many properties are in the area that we're talking about?
Over 1,600. So it would be the third largest HPOZ. And, you know, I just want to get a show. I'm really impressed that all of you have come out today on a rainy day. You know, when you put out flyers and signs and electronic newsletters, you don't know if you're going to get 10 people or 500 people, but I'm really, thank you so much for coming and being part of this. But I wanted to ask you, how many of you saw the signs that were out? Okay. So you all saw the signs on the street. How many of you got a flyer? Okay. How many of you saw the MMRA newsletter blast? Okay. And any of you see us on the announcement on nextdoor.com? You did? Okay. Any one of you see any Facebook Miracle Mile LA Facebook page announcement? No? I'm just curious, just getting a vibe. Sorry, what?
Now that I know it exists.
Oh, it exists, yeah. And Kimberly here, she runs it. And oh, they did.
And Beverly Press.
Beverly Press and the Larchmont Chronicle did an article. Did you have a question, sir?
I'd just be curious, out of a show of hands, who wants the preservation zone in here?
Keep him up while I pan the camera, please.
Actually, just who doesn't want it?
No.
That's not here. Who doesn't want it?
Put your hands up if you want it, just for the camera.
Want the HPOZ. If you want preservation.
Okay, cut. Thank you.
I think that there are other people that may not necessarily know either way of whether they want it or don't want it. They need to be educated on it, and then know all the facts to be able to make a decision. So, like for instance, I couldn't vote yes or no of what I want.
I don't want a McMansion next to my house. I know I don't want that.
Right. Yeah.
But that's 400% the size of the house.
Yeah.
Built by a Lego technician.
And let me tell you, they are in and out. They just go in.
Yeah, I've never seen a house built so fast.
Yeah. Here's the danger. And this is just a side comment on in the real estate world what's happening. Developers are looking to our area because it's not protected. So they're looking for homes under $1 million, around 900 to 950, which qualifies in our area as a fixer. I mean, you know, $1 million fixers in our area. Could you believe it today? So that's the kind of home and price point they're going to buy in order to build a McMansion so they can make X amount of profit. So I encourage everyone to talk to their neighbors about HPOZ, about protecting the area, but also very important, keep your homes up and speak to your neighbors who don't keep their homes up. If your home and the front lawn looks like a rag, if you keep accumulation in your driveway, if you let your house turn to pot, this devalues your home, devalues your neighborhood, and is prey for developers to come and snatch it up, demolish it, and build a McMansion next to you.
But I think what you mentioned earlier about the economics is key, because a major piece of this is the individual owner. And the individual owner is going to be incentivized by developers when they're offered a huge return on a property that's a fixture that they haven't cared about.
Right.
So it's not just what we do as a community, but it boils down to the individual. And the individual needs to be sensitive to what the community would like in terms of preservation in the long run.
Very true.
Because I think that people will, it's not just developers who will pay that money, it's other people who may want to move in and fix it as well. Absolutely. So it's preventing the developers, that's the key.
And one thing I could add, I mean, there, from what I understand, maybe we all know of this, but there are consortiums of investors paying cash for over the asking price. I mean, this is really like a swarm. And so obviously we need to move on this sooner than later. and they have no interest in our area, in the community.
Sure.
Since we got our HPOZ, we had a couple of homes in our HPOZ that were very, very derelict that we were worried about. One was owned by a mentally ill woman. Other people, because we were designated in 2008, a lot of people were saddled with economic hardship, not of their own making. Their businesses went south. Since about 2 years ago, when a house changes hands, we all kind of cringe. Every one of them has turned out to be a good thing. We are attracting people who want historic homes. We have houses that you'd swear if you sneeze next to it, it would fall down. Perfect. One, in fact, got an HPOZ award this year, and it didn't even have windows in it. The elements were going inside the house. It's now occupied by a lovely little family, and it's worth $1.6 million. That's what they put it on the market for, and they withdrew it. But it's been nothing but good news for us as far as getting stuff preserved and undercover. Our neighborhoods come up hugely. And besides that, the developers, because they can't make their money anymore, they aren't interested. So it draws people who have a like-minded feeling for historic properties, and it deters people who want to flip it, take the money, and run and go live in Bel Air. So it's worked out very, very well for us.
Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
What are the next steps?
The next step is we have to find money for a survey.
Yeah.
And do that. Yes, sir?
Speaking of money for a survey, you know, if you're talking 75,000, even 100,000, there was 1,600 properties in the neighborhood. I mean, that's not that much per house.
And that's a distinct possibility.
It's a possibility.
Can I speak for a second, Mark, on a few points? Because we're getting close to our time where we have to leave. A few things. The reason we're taping this is we've got the MMRA channel on YouTube. Okay? So if your friends and neighbors are that you're pitching this to, and they start hitting you with all the questions about the information covered today, they can watch this on YouTube. The other important part is why we needed this meeting today was to see if we were going to get any support. Obviously, there's support. Now that we have support, Mr. Zetka and Mr. Matz and I and the board of directors will go, okay, kids, now we've got to come up with a plan of action. Okay? So did we have a complete plan of action for you today? No, because we didn't know whether it would just be us talking to ourselves. So we're very encouraged to see you all here. That's why it's important that we have your email. Okay, so we'll be doing it, we'll be communicating to you as people who came to this meeting. We'll also be communicating to you through our newsletter, and also in an effort to build more support and to answer questions. So what you can do is Mark's email was distributed broadly in the special bulletin. If a question occurs to you after this meeting, send him a message. If you can't remember that, just send it to info@miraclemilela.com.
And if I don't have the answer, I'll get it for you.
So now we know we have support. We'll go formulate a plan of action. But you can begin as salesmen now. There's enough material out there, and YouTube.
Feel free to go to if you just Google LA City Historic Preservation, you'll find her department, and it gives you everything about HPOZ. How to start it, this and that. We're concentrating on the how to do it, but everything else, all the information is right on that website.
My cards are in the back as well. If anyone wants
We need to wrap up.
email or call.
And I want to thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, guys.